let's get into our topic here. So excited to have everyone from the Clearing community and those who are new to the community. Welcome. So we have virtual events, in-person events that we talk about all things about the future of work and the employee experience. And we're here for a very important topic that I know a lot of people I've talked to have been struggling with. It's almost one of the most important secondary decisions post-COVID, right? For most companies. You made the decision to go remote, or you did that temporarily, or now you find yourself in a place where company is mostly remote. And then how do you gather, right? So how do you actually, how, if and when, and how would you do it? How would you actually get in person together? And I'm really excited to introduce Karina Bernacki here, who's the head of people at Visco and has had a varied and interesting career across different types of operational roles. It's been an agile coach and I think has a very interesting background in terms of how you're coming at the people role. But has a lot of experience just in terms of team building and bringing people together in general, but then also specifically on this topic around bringing remote teams together. So really excited to talk about this because it's a constant, very practical question that folks kind of have, right? So just to set some context for everyone, is the way I'm coming at this is that with remote and hybrid work becoming front and center for a lot of companies out there, they've almost sleepwalked through, let's call it certain rituals and how they've changed, right? And you kind of wake up and realize, oh, wait a minute, we're doing this a certain way now, but is that the way that we should be doing it? I mean, I think this is one of those very critical ones, which is when do we get people together? And there's been a lot of talk of return to the office and hybrid work in different worlds. And that's a subset of this that we definitely want to be talking about, which is in a hybrid kind of work environment, how and when would you bring everyone together in some kind of context as well? And well, with that, I would love to welcome Karina and just say hello. And maybe do you want to just talk about what's bringing you to this conversation, getting you excited about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when you said that, during COVID, when companies had to go to remote really fast, there was an immediate need of let's recreate the office virtually, as opposed to let's rethink what we should be doing. So I love this topic. Obviously, as you mentioned, I'm the head of people at Visco now. I'm also the founder of Unraveled Coaching and Advisory Services. And a particular passion of mine is this one, right? It is how you bring people together. I think my first experience that I designed was around 2006, 2007. Oh my gosh, long time ago. Don't quote me on that date. It was a really long time ago. But I remember then the feeling that I had very little knowledge. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? I was just thrown this side project. That's how it happens for a lot of us. Here's a side project, plan an event. But ever since, I've been really committed to creating intentional and impactful experiences. So super excited to be a part of this topic. I think there are so many ways to engage in person successfully, but there are a few failures. So the good news is there's lots of ways you can do it right and only a couple ways that it can probably go really wrong. So just to give everybody some hope and optimism for this topic.
Oh, all right. Excited to begin there. So to get started, do you have any in-person events that you've planned recently or you have upcoming that's top of mind?
Yes, there's actually one that is happening on Monday, but we have an entire program that I designed at Visco. We call it our in-person all hands event. The name could use some branding work, admittedly, but we do them once every quarter. So we've done 4 now at this point. And really that event sort of came about because we were experiencing some challenges. We were experiencing some challenges around getting alignment and being aligned on our goals and our focus. We were experiencing some challenges around really building trust and understanding how we all kind of fit in to some of the work that was happening within the company. And so that's sort of how these events came about. And this particular event is a combination of things. It starts with us coming together for the first 2 days where we do company-wide strategic planning. Every single person in the company comes. We get in a very big room, hence we call it our BRP, our big room planning event. And each team sort of has their own table and their own space. And throughout the course of the day, it's heavily facilitated and very structured. But we work together to sort of align on our high level goals, what our priorities are, what are the key dependencies and risks that we're not seeing. And we build out a massive visual wall of all of these goals and priorities so we can look across the entire company and understand how we all fit in, what are the challenges in front of us, and what does success look like a few months from now when we get together. So that's sort of like the first part of the event. Then we go into the more fun parts, of course, because we're there and we're in person. So we spend time, sometimes we have teams, we give them budgets, and then their managers will plan like a team building event on the third day. There have been other times where we did large company-wide, sort of like educational workshops. We did one recently on learning about multipliers and diminishers, and then we went into team building, and then we always host some sort of large social gathering in the evening before we go, where we can do some celebrations, talk about some of our successes, and just kind of get a lot of those memories and sort of moments cemented before we go back to our remote lives. So that is one example of many that we do at Visco today. And we have one on Monday, actually. So
Got it. So just to back up, what we're talking about here is a company-wide, a fully remote company that is coming together. Everyone's flying to one location, and you're doing that on a quarterly basis, correct?
yes.
As a rhythm. And kind of went into some of the details of how that step would break down, right? So I guess first of all, I just want to say what we want to cover, right? So let's start with just like these fully like remote teams, right? If there's companies on here who are thinking about going fully remote and looking at guidance versus hybrid, that's like a related like subtopic, but feel free to reach out. We have resource talk about that later, but assume that you are like fully remote, like for a moment, right? So how do you even get to that moment of saying, yeah, we need to gather together in person, even though we're fully remote? How do you get to that decision? I think you go from there to a cadence of, in your case, quarterly, right? When you see different models emerge, but how do you even get to the decision of saying, okay, we're a remote company. Let's assume that's true, but we do want to come together. So what was the rationale for you all?
So I think one important statement that I kind of keep in the back of my head is that remote first does not mean anti in person, right? It just kind of signifies that preference for flexibility and supplementing that with meaningful in-person interaction. So I think sometimes this conversation about return to office gets very, this is good, this is bad. So just holistically, it's about flexibility. Really, when you get to the decision to do this, if you have somebody say, I think we should get into in person, if that happens before you've already come with a why, you've already identified an issue, the first thing that I always do is I create a bit of a vision. I really want to double down on understanding, why are we doing this? In this particular moment, what are the reasons for it? Are there issues that we're dealing with? Are we trying to prevent issues from happening? You have to really spend a little bit of time before you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard to make sure you deeply understand why you're doing it. Once you have sort of that vision for this is why we think it's important, this is what we hope to achieve, you can really nail down your outcomes. So when we get out of this event, what do we think will be different? What is the work world going to feel like? What will people be saying? How will they be thinking about it? What will be different after this? And I kind of start with that as like my guiding policy or my frame that will basically help me make all of the decisions that come after that. So you really need to understand the why first, which I know is everybody always says, understand the why. Well, that's because it's kind of important to everything that we do, especially when you think about how valuable everyone's time is. So when you do these events, it's quite significant. So for us, we had a series of things. We have engagement surveys in our company that were indicating that there were some challenges with alignment. We had some execution issues that were coming up that when we dug into them a little bit, it became very clear that they were mostly communication related as opposed to skill or capability. Communications, kind of circular loops, these types of things that can happen, not just in remote companies and humans as well, but they're problematic in remote world. So we had a lot of data that sort of showed us that this issue was coming up, and it made it clear that we need to do something about it. The in-person part of it, like obviously there are so many different ways to solve that and those issues. So this was just one component of a larger strategy, which I also think is important when you're doing events. Doing an event is great. If you just do it as a one-off, like a sidecar, and you don't think about how it fits into your ways of working in your company holistically, chances are the impact's going to be pretty small. probably just going to be a little bump, but it's not really going to create long lasting sort of stickiness. So on the other side of thinking about your why is then thinking about how will I know if I achieved those outcomes, if I got those things that I thought were important, how will I know if things are better, if this was a valuable use of money, time, right? Energy. So I think defining the why, then defining like how I measure success, what these key outcomes are going to be, that'll give you the frame that you need for the rest of the planning experience, including what do we do when we all get back to our machine, we're back in our safe office space. What should be different in our day-to-day? Do we need to change the way we plan, the way we communicate? These types of things come up from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the thinking about that why. So I think it's important. And I feel like certainly chief people officers, you tend to get involved into like budgets and you think about it. But something that I think a lot of operators don't understand is that there's a significant CFO component to making a decision about, are we going to gather?
Yeah.
And it's as good a venue as any to practice your muscle of ROI calculations, right? For especially a small company, say like sub 20, 30, the cost that you're saving in rent by going fully remote can be fully recouped, if you want to call it that, can be fully spent in one event of gathering the whole company together. You've got to be like meaningful. Like it's got to be something there's like alignment across the company with, right? If you're doing a company wide kind of layer. And you said something interesting about, hey, like remote first doesn't mean there's nothing in person. And it's true, because if you think about the flip, if someone said, yep, we're an in-person company. So does that mean that no one gets laptops or no one ever messages from home, or the world doesn't work that way on the flip side either, right? So that's an interesting point. So then if we have some established why, and let's stick with the company level, right?
Yeah.
There's some alignment within the leadership team, which then the CFO would say, yes, okay, I get it. It costs this much, but fine. We're going to do this.
It was
We're gonna
that
do some-
easy, by the way. I just had to say one sentence. I'm kidding, everybody. It was not, but yes.
I'm sure. So then, yeah, like what is that process? Can we get a little bit more specific? So I think you're right. You do need to have this alignment and around like outcomes and like what will happen at the end of this time. So can you give us folks some understand the kinds of things that we are promising or hoping to get out of that can be measured, or even if it's qualitative, right? What is it that we are doing to, let's just call it, make that case to the executive team around why we need to gather at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe this is like a good moment to mention the way that I approach HR or people operations, whatever you're wanting to call it today. I approach it very strongly with a business lens. Maybe that's partly because of my background. So I tend to think in terms of the business and the ROI just as a natural starting point. So that is very much how I approached this company-wide event and getting my CFO and CEO on board. I think this is something that even if you're just doing a team event, anytime you're spending company money and you're asking people to give up and disrupt their lives, right? Because it is a disruption now. You're working remotely. You have to be incredibly respectful. You have to think about that as if it was your time and it's your money and what that means. So I always start with building out a business case. Sounds kind of boring. It's actually quite fun, and it ends up helping you define the boundaries of the event itself. So now I have my why. I have a bit of an idea on the success. For us in particular, with the trust issue, we were seeing a little bit of a bump in attrition. And when we did exit interviews, there was some data coming in around people feeling a little frustrated that they weren't feeling like they were being heard or they weren't being trusted. So we knew we had some data there that was costing us some money already. Also, in missing some execution deliverables, for me, I was able to leverage some of our project tracking software that we use to understand some of the metrics around delivery, show where slowdowns were. So I think because of my background and because of my team's background, we were able to build a case around this is what this might be potentially costing us. Here are some of the opportunity costs that are happening. And I believe that by doing this, we can improve XYZ. So sort of try to identify those things. I also had to identify a time horizon. I think this is important because change takes time, but it's not like instant. You really got to set expectations appropriately. The day after the event, what's that going to look like? But what about 3 months? What about 6 months? When you get to 6 months and you get that backslide that tends to happen with humans when they're going through change, How do I make sure I'm measuring longer term to be able to show that ROI over time? So I think really trying to put your business hat on for a minute. All of the things are true. We want to have fun. It feels good to be connected. We want to make memories. Yes, I believe in all those things. Those are not reasons enough, not from a business
Mhm.
standpoint. I'd just say, put that business hat on, really dig into that why that you came up with. What were those issues? How would you measure those issues? How would you know if something was different, even if it's qualitative, right? Like it's an engagement score. Maybe we're scoring really low on alignment and trust, and we think that's like hitting our attrition numbers. You can use the engagement score to show we want to get this kind of an increase over time. So I think you really got to start from the business case. It is a significant investment. Another thing I would consider, always frame your first one as an experiment. Don't frame it as some huge commitment that your CFO or CEO are going to need to make for a very long period of time. They're a little nervous. They're a little unsure,
Mhm.
right? That's a big decision. So if you can frame it in a way of, we're going to try, this is an experiment. This is what we hope to get out of it. Here's how we're going to know. And then we can decide if we want to invest more. That tends to really help ease some of the pressure of them like committing everything up front to something that feels a little vague or ambiguous to them. So hopefully that helps a little bit on how to think about it.
That's super helpful. And I mean, the kind of digging that you're doing into the business to say, okay, these are the outcomes. Like that right now we have some like issues and actually even well beyond just engagement surveys, right? It's like specific functions or departments are looking to get to certain things done by within the next quarter, next couple of quarters. And we're linking that to the engagement surveys and probably collaborating with the teams there and the team leads to come up with this whole program. That's fascinating. And then sticking with that, maybe let me ask that question about what do you think about, you started getting into it a little bit. How do you think about what you actually do with your time together? Right. So obviously the thing that people don't want is we're all like, I don't know, it's an offsite, right? Because assuming there's no HQ. So, or often there's like an HQ and you bring everyone to HQ and then everyone's just sitting in computers next to each other or like in the same hotel, just like working in different places. It's kind of not what you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's true. But then what do you want, right? What are the things that you should be investing your time in when you're bothering to spend both money, hard, and not to mention soft, which is the time to bring everyone together? What are the kinds of things that consistently you think are the kinds of things you should be looking to do when you're in person?
Definitely some things that are way more productive or just impactful in person, and there's others that are not, right? So to your point, if you are just coming to do tasks together, that's a choice. I don't know if you're going to get your money's worth out of that. There are a couple of areas that I think are pretty consistently just, they're faster in person and they tend to just give you a little bit more cohesion in your overall experience. And one of those is, I'd say, around planning and making decisions. Those types of activities, everyone comes from different systems, different environments. They have different ways of doing things. They have different perspectives. That can be really difficult sometimes to really align virtually if you've not built
Mhm.
a really strong operating model. So I think those types of activities are great. Even if it's not a company-wide like strategic planning exercise like what we do, but let's say a new project is kicking off and you need to really set it up for success. Getting together in person for something like that, where you can make fast decisions, quickly align, gather each other's perspectives, really kind of build that cohesive muscle before you go and start executing, that would be a really good use of time. I think connection is another one, but I think we should open that word up a little bit because it can sound a little ambiguous. When you are working and you want to get, like, you want a high performing team, you want a high performing experience, you just want to get into flow, the level of trust you have with the people you are partnering with, it's the difference that makes a difference. Building that trust virtually is something you absolutely can do. Don't let anyone tell you can't, but it does take more time, right? And it takes more work and more intention. So I think if you're really trying to cement relationships, improve communication, go deeper into trust, adding in the body language element of in person can be quite an exponential, uh, basically, improvement over that possibility. So team building, onboarding, new teams that are just getting formed. Maybe you have a new leader that's come to the company. Maybe you have a completely new way of working, a new product that's kicking off, big change moments that are going to require trust decision-making, alignment, sort of those three big ones, those are really good reasons to get together. In my experience, I'm not saying that the other ones are not important. Those three will speak to the people that are giving you the money to get the event. And they'll also be the three that will create the most meaningful experiences. I think the worst thing that you can hear after an event is someone saying, what a waste of my time. That is kiss of death. It's the worst. But then on the other side, the best thing is, that was amazing. That was so great. I learned X. Oh, I didn't know this about so-and-so, and now I do. Or I feel so much better about X, Y, and Z. You don't want to hear the, what a waste of my time. Like, worse.
You definitely don't.
No.
So maybe that actually relates to like probably the tail end of your process, right? As you finish one, you implemented it. There's like a reflection and
Yes.
or some idea of the retrospective, let's call it. I'd love to learn more about how you execute on that. And then also you've gone to a point which is, I would say it's on the more unique side, right? Where there is a process on a quarterly basis that the entire company is committed to coming in person while remote. I think that's relatively, we can either call it mature or an outlier in terms of that kind of like commitment. But yeah, I'm wondering if there was that process of like reflecting, and you said maybe the first one wasn't the plan maybe, right? But how did you go from that first one to getting a solidified process at this point where the frequency is like company-wide commitment on a quarterly basis?
Absolutely. And it definitely has been very iterative. I will say from the first one to the last one we had, not the same. And they shouldn't be, right? They should not be exactly the same. Feedback loops are something I'm incredibly passionate about because I do not want to wait for the perfect decision. So I like to build things that will speak to me and let me know if they're going wrong so I can move faster and just change as I go. So I design these programs with that same piece in mind. I really like to think about the what happens next. I know I mentioned that when I was talking about the vision. I tend to be a little bit of a go to imagination land. I am not suggesting this for everybody. I'm just a very visual learner. I like to close my eyes and I like to think about like how things will feel, what I will hear, these real sensory type elements. And that will help me think about what other components in my company operating model are going to be impacted by whatever happens outside of this event. And how can I measure changes in those areas that will also help inform not only the feedback loop that I have on the event, because there's obviously surveys you should always do, a post-action survey. Never skip that step. People are always willing to tell you how they feel about an event and always do it within the first 24 hours. If you can send it to them 5 minutes after the event is over, that is the best time because it's very fresh and it's very new. So definitely do that. That is a must. But all those other success factors that you defined up front, you need to be making sure you understand the data sources for those. Do you have engagement surveys, your productivity metrics? What are these other elements in your system? If it's something around communication, even qualitative, am I hearing from team leads that things feel better? Even if it's a feeling, it was valuable because that feeling is enough, right? To help them trust more and lean more in. So it's a little bit of both of first, just feedback loop on the event itself. Did we have enough of the right kind of beverages? Were there enough food options? How was the lighting? It was freezing. There's that feedback loop, which is sort of the single loop, and then that secondary kind of learning loop of, and did my system change? Did my relationships change? So I just really challenge everybody to make sure you identified both. And the event ones need to be fast. You need to catch those right away. One caution. There's probably many, but I can only think of one right now. There's probably a lot of cautions. Do not take the feedback you get about the event experience word for word. I've seen a lot of people who are a little bit newer to doing these and they get some feedback back and they're not really thinking about the magnitude of the impact. They're just like, oh, we need to change that. This one person didn't like this particular thing. So the next event, we're going to do this differently. I really caution you not to jump to too many conclusions. You really need to take in that. You need to read it. You need to think about cohesively how their feedback laid into the other perspectives of the week. And when you're making a change, make sure it's one that you're optimizing for the larger group, right? And if you have outliers, you can always think about creating alternative experiences for them in the next one. So just be really careful how you take that feedback. Don't jump too quickly. People have a lot of thoughts and feelings. If you've gone to a restaurant and spent a lot of money, you're leaving, if anything went wrong, you're probably thinking about everything that went wrong and you're listing it all out. That doesn't mean that there weren't beautiful elements. You can just get focused in that negative space. But you should be iterating every time. If you only do one a year, first of all, congratulations. That's amazing because that's a lot lighter lift than 3 or 4 a year. So great work. You really need to think about that feedback, and you need to go and have like follow-up focus groups, listening sessions. So you take that survey feedback and then go dive a little deeper. Go talk to people, try to understand a lot more about it because you've got time to iterate. And the next event should feel different, right? It should feel different than that last one. Those things should not be the same. If you see that same feedback coming consistently, something is going wrong in your planning process and you need to work it out. Hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, it's great insight on reflecting and moving forward. And then can you share a little bit more about how you got to the point of quarterly specifically, like versus annual, for example?
Yes, I can. And I will also say that currently in the process of reflecting on what comes next, right? So this was sort of our first year. Quarterly for us was because we were going through a pretty exciting product pivot and an organizational pivot. So we had a new executive team. We had a new president that had come on board. We were trying to move really fast and kind of shape the company. So when we were going through a significant change, in-person events can give little acceleration bumps as well as check-ins to make sure you're on the right path, right? I work in startup land. You got to be adaptable. The market moves really fast. You don't have an entire year or 2 years to see if you're on the right track. So quarterly for us was because we wanted to know that the decisions and plans we were making were moving us in the right direction. And we wanted to know in a really short time period. So if they weren't, we could make decisions and not lose an entire year. So for us, it was incredibly situational. Think to your comment earlier about outlier or more mature. I think this is where the why is critical. Why you're getting together and why you're doing it should be unique to your company and your market and where you're at. And that was what we needed at that time. Is that what we're going to need for forever? No. And it shouldn't be because we're growing and we're changing, right? We needed to learn and develop higher order planning skills really quickly. I would say after doing many of these, a lot of our leaders and engineers and the folks that work at the company, they're much stronger planners than they used to be. So even the activities we were doing in the beginning, we don't need to really spend as much time doing those things anymore. We can add other things to it. So
So that's a good point. There's a strong, it's a very custom, and it sounds like there's a big L&D component to this. It's almost like you realize there's a skill set gap in the broader employee base that you wanted to invest in. And this is something that you're using as a venue to do that and really being intentional about spending this like focused time with the group on this. One question from, Anonymous asked, any ideas for post-event tactics? So survey questions and roundtables. I think you got into this a little bit already, but let's just say, so usually, obviously you're doing the survey. You said everyone, that's a must. You have a survey. You ask both, you kind of said there's a logistical side, like how cold was it? Or maybe we'll get that feedback, but what do you think about this event or that event or the venue or whatever? But then there's also probably questions qualitative about, was it a meaningful use of your time is one that we see often, or would you want to come to this again if you had a choice? And then on roundtables, there's another, so do you do any kind of focus groups, anything like as a consistent basis after that?
Yes, focus groups and listening sessions are really important. And I also say this is where you need your coalition of the willing. It depends on the size of your company, right? Like our company is a little bit smaller. We're just a little over 100 folks. But even that is a lot of folks to get to in a short amount of time. But if your company is larger, 500,000, 5,000, you have to engage other people. So really engaging like the rest of the executive team and all of the rest of the managers and leaders to not only have the survey, to not only have some focus groups. And by the way, if you do focus groups, please make sure that they are cross-functional. You need those different perspectives. Don't just go to one group. Trust me, they will experience things differently. But also that engaging managers to have team conversations, to have it come up in their one-on-ones, and then give them a place where they can funnel that information back. Because what you're going to see is you'll see multiple perspectives. You'll see lots of different layers. And through that, you can do some analysis to try to really understand what is the real core feedback here, right? Not sort of just the surface things, but what are the underlying things that people are taking away? What are those bigger root causes or things that we need to focus on? So I would say surveys, yes. Whatever your original success metrics were, make sure you're measuring those. Focus groups are amazing. Roundtables, any version of those small groups. If you do those, try not to include the managers in those. Try to have somebody outside of their department host. I'll come back to that in one second. Let me perk that over here on the count. Come back.
Mm.
And then also engage managers and have them have one-on-one and team conversations. You want as much feedback as you can within the first couple weeks after, right? So that then you can have some time to process, sort through it, and determine any plans or changes that you want to make going forward. Feedback is critical for everything.
Speaking of that, kind of, you talk about segmenting managers a little bit because there's a little bit of a divide depending on the culture.
Mhm.
But there's also a question from John about how do you segment post-event surveys to really understand impact? So actually, I wonder, is that something you think about? Like, what did leadership or management or managers think about this particular event versus frontline employees or department one versus department two? Because you also mentioned how like you want to get cross-functional feedback. How do you think about that? And especially if, I don't know, leadership loved it and employees hated it or vice versa, right? Like there's like significant
True.
differences.
That definitely happens. At Visco, because of our size and our structure, I don't actually create separate surveys here. When I am slicing the data with the team, with my team, we try to see, oh, managers are experiencing it this way, ICs this way, this department this way. However, when I was at larger companies, I would actually create different surveys because I also wanted to understand what was the burden on managers. Did you feel prepared? I wanted different information from them. Did you feel like you were able to communicate effectively with your team about what to expect and what was going to come? Did you feel like you were well equipped for what happened next? How about during the event? Like, did you have everything you need? So in larger companies, I tend to create different surveys. It's just a little faster and it's slightly different questions. Again, because of our size here, I do slice up the data to look at it specifically to see if there are big nuances. So small versus a little bit larger, got to optimize for your situation, but it's audience,
Mhm.
right? It's if any of you work in product or have worked in product, it's the same mindset. These are your customers, right? They are investing their time and energy to come to this event. You are trying to create an experience for them. You are their service provider in all of those ways, but they are all different personas. Your managers are a different persona than like your ICs, right? So do you understand how they're experiencing it? Can you understand the data in those terms so that you apply that learning effectively? So yes, it's a great question. And it is very important. You need to understand who is providing that data in their context.
Got it. So I'll stick to the core, the cadence piece, like one more time. So just in my observations, right? So again, talking about specifically fully remote companies, what people have gravitated towards by and large, I mean, there's different things. It kind of splits out a little bit based on size, right? So hundreds of employees or like thousands of employees and like fully remote. I mean, there are only a few that are like fully in that camp, right? Most fully remote companies are sub 100. But like sub 100, there's typically like the once a year, at least for leadership or a subset of the company coming together. Maybe you see like more than that, but clearly by time you get to 100 plus, what you start to see is more autonomy within divisions and leadership where they would have their own. The engineering team is doing their offsite, right? The pre-remote, the classic annual sales kickoff, that's still happening for like remote companies as a classic event, right? Which actually I've seen some like HR teams glom onto that as a way to convert into this is the way we're going to get the whole company, or at least if sales and marketing was like 50%, now we're going to couple others, so we get 70% of the company together in this one kind of thing, kind of one venue, right? But there's also a split in terms of managers or teams doing things on their own, right? So let me ask this question, which is related to what Will is asking, right? So how at your company, you've done whole company is coming together once a quarter, right? But then what do you do beyond that? And do managers or teams even beyond that meet on some kind of cadence? And how would you think about the autonomy or like decision making across the company in these little areas for in-person meetings to happen?
We definitely do have other events. And I think this is where I'm going to use this like stupid word, programmatize, like those like silly word that people use, but you really do want to start to create a sense of a program, how you think about events. There is a standard like mindset, mental model that you can use for any event, whether it is 5 people or like 5,000 people. that will allow you to evaluate these needs as they arise. So at Visco, we've done other things. We've done hack houses. We had a project that was not going really well. A couple engineers were like, hey, I think it would be really fast if we could just basically get in a room together and knock this out for a week. So we ended up getting them a house for a week, and basically they holed up in there and they got their project out the door, right? So that's an example. We have executive offsites. We can do management offsites where like we're getting together specifically to bring this group of people together for specific purpose and intent. It goes like back to the why. Training, there's some learning and development that we've done. We've done create weeks, which is like our version of the hack week. So that's a very different kind of experience, basically working in an office experience for a week and working in person as teams, as opposed to just doing like a company planning. I think there are so many different versions and varieties, but they all come back to these core things. What are the activities that will give you the most impact by being in person? Which ones most benefit from in-person interactions? And then is it like worth it to put that investment in? Are the people willing to go? And once you create a bit of this kind of playbook approach, if you're in a big company, you can basically make it self-service. You've got a department, they've got a travel stipend. This is the budget you can use per year on your events. But I don't know how to plan events. I'm not an event planner. I'm just like I'm a director. I'm a team lead. No problem. Here's some playbooks here's how we can help you get started. Here's how you can think about it. Here's what you can do to kind of make sure you ensure success. So I really do think that the getting together in person, if you understand your why, you understand what you want to get from it, what those outcomes are, it'll help you make decisions about should you do it? How often should you do it? Where should you do it? I think this is another piece, like the location. Okay, I'm back up. I am very much an iterative human. I think I mentioned that earlier. I like to just go fast, experiment, learn as I go. So some details are not as important as others, 9 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Not with event planning. This is like the one time that I'm going to break everything that I usually say to everyone that I know. And I'm going to say, actually, details really matter when you're planning events. They matter a lot. Out of respect for people's time and energy they're going, you really need to think through everything, including the location, the space. Let's say it's a smaller group. Maybe you're bringing, maybe you're a new team lead. You've just come on, you've become the manager of managers in a new department, and you want to kick off your new team. You basically want to do some team building, working agreements, how we work together, how we communicate, and then maybe do a little road mapping and some planning for what's going to come next. These things are very effective when they're in person because they have lots of secondary and tertiary benefits that you get. If you are doing that, one of your number one goals is probably to build trust and some shared agreement and understanding. Those are things that are much more effective when you do them in more intimate settings. So do not pick a huge room. Don't pick a very loud, crowded restaurant with like people talking everywhere. You want to think about the space that you're selecting as part of the experience, part of the amplification of the experience that you want, right? So that also will help you align your budget needs, by the way, right? It's like how much of that needs to be there. If you want to do things that are much more casual, you want to create organic experiences, then that's when you want to think, okay, everyone's flying in. I want to have this structured time. I have a plan for the time together, but I also want to make room for organic serendipity, accidental, what people used to call the water cooler. I think that's very dated. Nobody may know what a water cooler is, so regret that sentence immediately. So in that case, you might say, okay, well, let's have everyone stay in the same hotel. Let's not give people options for where they stay. We're going to work in one hotel. That way, when people get done with the event or whatever is planned, there are accidental moments where they could run into each other in the lobby. Maybe they'll see each other at the hotel restaurant or whatever when they're eating, or they'll run into each other at the gym. I'm making things up at this point. So all of these sort of details are very important, and they all are guided by your original why. You should get back to the why and the outcomes you want. But I think I think they all run very similar. So even though these events are at different scales, so the details are more or less, the thought process, the mental model, same. You can use the same one for thinking about them.
So that's interesting. There's like a playbook you can point to that team lead saying, okay, great. You want to get your team of 12 together. Like here, think through this. It includes the why do we need to get together? I'm trying to solve this problem. Maybe this is what it looks like now and before and after. And let me go into this. What about operational help? So all those things that you just said, all these details matter. That team lead, like maybe is not equipped to do all that.
They're probably not.
Like what should I book? Where should I do it? So how much do you think it's like the role of the people team to kind of enable individual team leads or is it more like they're like operational lieutenants kind of do more of that? Or how much like is operational help are you kind of centrally helping for these more smaller events that are happening?
So, I mean, this is going to be my personal perspective. So, anybody on this call who's going to get upset about what I say next, I'm sorry. I do think that the future version, like how people teams are evolving, how the strategic like role that they are playing in the company, well outside of just HR, I do think that event planning is going to be that space that you're going to want those teams building out their skills and capabilities really strong, because that's the way that you can really enable and unlock a larger company by building up that expertise in at least one core area. A lot of like HR folks are not going to have this experience on day one. It's not something you get just out of the box, right? It's sort of an intentional path you have to take. However, while I say that, I will say in the absence of that, there's a couple like layers that I tend to think through of support, and this will come back to your budget. If you have enough budget, hire an expert. Just period, point blank. Hire an event planner. There's so many out there now that specialize in like remote to in-person kind of things. Shoot me an email. I'll give you some names. But if you have the budget for it, just do yourself a favor. Even if you only do it for one, because you will learn from them and their process how to think about these things, right? So if you can't afford it every time, try to see if you can afford it at least once. If you can't, let's go down the budget lane. Don't have enough budget to hire somebody. Okay, no big deal. There are books, blogs, podcasts. There are lots of free resources out there that will at least give you a better shot than if you were doing it completely on your own. Go and see what other people have done. Find people that have had some successful events, somebody that you know, ask around your network. Get some of those resources. There's actually quite a lot out there. A lot of it's probably garbage. Sorry, it's kind of, but all of it will help stimulate how you think about it, and it will give you some new things to consider. So I think that's like the low end of the budget. If you can afford to hire somebody, please do. If not, and then for the people teams, if you are somebody that works in the HR people operations space today, if you work in learning development, even if you work in talent acquisition, if you work in any of these fields, organizational effectiveness is all of your activities combined together is what creates organizational effectiveness, organizational awesomeness. So if you do not have the skill set, start building it. Start reading, get into the space. You can absolutely self-learn. You do not need a degree from college. You just got to put some time and energy into it. And you need to understand some of the core design thinking principles behind events. I think you mentioned this earlier, and this is probably the part that people have the hardest time with. It's really easy to think big, budget. This is the city, state, country we're going to. I got to pick a hotel. Sure, those are easy. Now, what do we do when we get there? What is our run of show? How do we create flow? How do these different activities build and create a cohesive story and experience for people? How do I make sure that there is plenty of time for my more introverted folks to take a timeout and to get a break? How do I balance the full-on social interaction with some quiet reflection time? How do I balance like structured time with unstructured, like more organic time? If you're feeling overwhelmed as I'm saying all of these words, I hear you. It does sound like a lot. And there is some real science and art to this part of the process. And it's the one where you probably need to spend most of your time. How you kick it,
Yeah, like the why and how you kick it off, the agenda setting, right?
the
Like,
agenda.
so, because there's the operational, like booking stuff and making sure things are happening, which also
Yes.
needs to happen. But I do agree with you. This is so important. This is ultimately like the design intent behind the actual event. And when you're talking previously about getting help, right, from like different sources, I wonder if that is something probably is the piece of this that ideally should not be outsourced, right? It's actually, if anything, it's insourced, meaning it's not
Yes.
just the people team, but actually that design of it happens via coordination, collaboration with key executives, with team leads, and people who are lined up with you on the why, right? This is what we're trying to establish in this case. And then ideally, you always, I would think you're going to an event planner with that as this is what we're trying to do, and then they're helping you execute on that, right? Or am I wrong in thinking that? Or do you feel like there's
A little bit. It
event
depends on who
planners
you
can help
get.
with that?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it just depends. The event planning space has changed a lot post COVID, and there's a lot of nuance. So some of the things that I design in the actual, like the run of show, like the design of the activities and how they're going to work, and we're gonna like what the facilitation is like. A
Mhm.
lot of event planning companies did not. That was not their specialty. They did not do that, right? They're just like high level. This is the event. Here's where you do this. Here's where you do this. And you go do this. You are seeing more people start to get into the space. The quality I can't speak to right now because I don't have a lot of experience with them, but it's just so custom and it's so unique to you, your culture, the people that you're working with. It becomes a bit of a consulting function inside the company if you build
Mhm.
this out in your people function, right? It's okay, I'm a manager. I want to get my team together. Not really sure exactly like what that should look like. I am not a skilled facilitator. I don't even know what facilitation means. Why do I even care about it? If I can go to that people team and I can give them my vision or my outcomes, because that's what you'll get asked. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you doing this? They can partner with you
Mhm.
to think through, okay, here are some activities that can help with X, Y, and Z. Does this get us closer to that Y? So, like for team building, for example, brand new team kickoffs they're so powerful when you can do them in person. Understate that. There are some great ways to do it virtually, but it's just so nice when you can get in person. And you want to like structure that time in a way where you're basically building trust with each activity. If you put the wrong activity first and people aren't quite comfortable with each other, you've basically just ruined the entire experience. It's going to be weird. It's going to be awkward. You're not really going to know why. And the whole thing is going to have
Mhm.
no flow. So, that kind of expertise, there are some groups that I've seen that are starting to do it externally, but you really do. You have to build it inside your company. You got it. You just got to learn. If you don't have the skill, read some books, get some classes, get some experience, get the skill. It is so important. I really wish everyone would learn this. I feel like even as a manager or any kind of lead in any situation, being a really strong
Right.
facilitator, it's a game changer. So do it. Go learn it, everyone.
I could not agree with you more. It's a general management skill, but it's especially true in the world of remote where you have these moments, right? Where as a team lead or a manager, you can really make an impact on the team. And yeah, so beyond being a people team skill in terms of facilitating, being an internal consultant for that, great leaders of remote teams would be naturally ones that are able to facilitate and think through the nitty gritty of making this happen well.
I think
Um,
something else that you could
one
think about, Thomas.
question for you.
Oh, sorry, we have a delay
But
happening. Fun Zoom. This is remote in real time as we contact delay. I was just going to say really quick, there are some tricks to building that capability outside of your people team that you should definitely consider because it's also great growth opportunities. If the people team is planning something, you can get certain departments to ask if anyone from their department wants to volunteer to be a part of the team. So they don't have to own the whole thing by themselves, but they can collaborate. And through that process, they can learn and start to develop more of that skill that they can then use when they go back into to being with their teams again. So there's lots of ways to help multiply outside of the people team once you start getting good at this. But yes, and I interrupted you, I think, because we had a delay.
no, no. So I want to take it in a slightly different direction, which is so you have these on-sites that you might happen, but clearly there are some benefits, right, for remote teams to gather in person. What can you do in between, even if it's a facsimile and it's not exactly the same virtually in between the times that you meet to get at some of those same kind of goals that you have trust, collaboration. And I almost view it as there's this big acceleration to you get to, if the event is executed well in terms of trust, collaboration, whatever the goals are, you typically very clear you can get that. And there's like a steady erosion, let's call it like the next week and the next week.
Yes.
How can you possibly keep things as high as possible?
So this will depend on your event, like what you're doing a little bit. So, but let's go off the one of like alignment and trust for now, since that's kind of what we've talked about. This is where I think it's really important for managers, especially after the event, that sort of post event moment where you have a meeting together and you talk about it. And you should literally have a team retro, like specifically for your team. What we got from this experience. Do we want to do anything different as a team? Hey, we really enjoyed X, Y, and Z. I think as a team, maybe we only talk about work all the time. Maybe we don't do enough pausing and reflecting. So maybe we should institute a culture of retros in our team on a regular basis virtually. Or maybe we should bake more time in for walk and talk one-on-ones because it was nice to we just having a really intentional conversation post-event at a much smaller level, like down with the people that are actually there, and asking, what were the things that we love the most? What can we do differently in how we operate today? When you're talking about strategic planning, for us, the rest of our system all flows from this BRP. So it's a constant reinforcement of the decisions that we made throughout every other thing that we do, right? So the way that we do smaller planning, our sprint cadence, our monthly demos, our company demo, the level of transparency around the work and the progress. So it's kind of this consistent reinforcement of that message of unification that we had. So, but that's a very specific use case, right? So for other things, you can host AMAs. Those are great for virtual, and it's a good way of sort of pausing from the day-to-day work and getting a little bit more personal and breaking some boundaries down. You can add elements to your all hands. We do things like 5-minute presentations, which allow our employees to give a presentation for 5 minutes on any, well, you should put some, where are my HR people? You should put some boundaries. But, basically, I have a hobby. I played roller derby, right? So I did a 5-minute presentation about roller derby. Little moments like that create natural breaks from talking about the work and the execution of tasks can help jog memories. It almost reminds people about that feeling that they had. So again, to go back to that why, you're always going to come back to this. What's your why? Why did you do it? What are the outcomes you're seeking? And then once you nail those, because you're going to nail them, your event's not going to be perfect, by the way, but you're still going to nail your outcomes. The reinforcement is the behavioral. How do I recreate that? And there's so many ways. There's also, look, I will say some things that are maybe not positive about virtual team events. If any of, hopefully nobody of you on here know me, but I think that they are great. I just don't think they're enough. So you can still do those things. If you want to do a chocolate tasting, a virtual Airbnb, whatever, those things are still great too. I just don't think they're enough to make remote cultures work in and of themselves. So design with intention. Don't let that be a fleeting moment.
Fair enough. So, and depending on your goal, oh, by the way, we are just about to wrap up. If there's any final questions, let's get them in there. Even if we're not able to answer it live, we will follow up with you folks. And so there's a couple in there. But I guess your point is if it's like a cultural connection thing, right? There's something clearly events that you're doing together in person, but then maybe there's certain virtual things that you do, or maybe a cadence is part of your all hands that you're doing virtually in between to keep on that theme in between like events.
You can use that same why to design a virtual interaction to achieve the same outcome, right? It may not be but it will still get you there. So you have to design with intention.
Right. So you have that backup for the CFO there. Well, great. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all these very practical ideas and the evolution of the program that you've built at Visco, and then more broadly, like how years of work has kind of informed you across from different angles. So thank you for the time, and thanks everyone for joining and for some of these great questions and interaction. And I look forward to see y'all on more of these Clear community events in the future.